The drummer had already begun playing when Niade stopped at the entrance. Behind her, hundreds of guests were laughing, singing, and calling her husband's name. Ahead of her stood the doorway of the Adebayo family house. It was not an ordinary house. The compound had belonged to Adekunle's family for 3 generations, sitting behind high cream-colored walls on one of the oldest wealthy streets in Ibadan. That evening, the gates had been decorated with white fabric, flowers, and strings of lights. Her wedding had taken place only hours earlier. The photographs had been beautiful. The prayers had been beautiful. The food had been abundant. Everyone had said she was lucky. Now her husband stood beside her, smiling awkwardly, as relatives urged them forward. "Come," Adekunle whispered. Niade did not move. His smile disappeared. "Niade." She looked at him. Then she looked past him, toward his father. Chief Babatunde Adebayo had been standing near the entrance, receiving congratulations from guests. But the moment Niade's eyes met his, something changed. The old man's face went completely still, not angry, not confused, afraid. Niade reached slowly into the small handbag hanging from her wrist. She removed a folded piece of yellowed paper. Adekunle frowned. "What is that?" She did not answer him. His mother stepped closer. "Please, my daughter, whatever this is, don't do it here." Niade finally spoke. "I cannot enter this house." The laughter around them faded. Someone lowered the volume of the music. Adekunle stared at her, as if he had suddenly stopped recognizing the woman he had married that morning. "What are you saying?" Niade looked directly at his father. "I was told that before I entered this family, one promise had to be kept." Babatunde's fingers tightened around his walking cane. "Who told you that?" Niade unfolded the paper. "Your father." For several seconds, nobody breathed. Then Babatunde whispered something so quietly that only the people nearest him heard it. "That promise was buried 30 years ago." Niade's eyes hardened. "No, Chief." She held up the paper. "You buried the person who made it." And that was when Adekunle realized that his wedding had not brought Niade into his family. It had brought his family's past back to the door. By the time the last guest left, the wedding compound no longer looked like a place of celebration. Plastic chairs stood in uneven rows beneath the canopies. Half-empty bottles of water sat beside abandoned plates. White flowers had begun to droop beneath the warm Ibadan night. But nobody had gone home completely. Not the Adebayo family, not the elders, and certainly not Niade. She sat alone in a small sitting room near the rear of the compound, still dressed in her burgundy bridal clothes, though someone had removed her heavy gel. Her coral beads pressed against her neck whenever she swallowed. Across from her, Adekunle paced. "You embarrassed my father in front of everybody." Niade looked down at her hands. "I know. You embarrassed me. I know." "Then explain it." She lifted her eyes. "I cannot enter that house." Adekunle stopped pacing. "Why?" "Because your father made a promise." "What promise?" Niade hesitated. She had spent months imagining this moment. None of those imagined versions had prepared her for the way Adekunle was looking at her. Not with hatred, with betrayal. "I need you to ask him." "I am asking you." "Then you are asking the wrong person." Adekunle laughed once, bitterly. "You wait until our wedding night to tell me there is some 30-year-old family secret. It isn't some secret. What is it?" Niade looked toward the closed door. "The reason your father wanted me to marry you." The room went silent. Adekunle's expression changed. "What does that mean?" Before Niade could answer, the door opened. Moronke entered. She had changed out of her wedding clothes and was now wearing a plain dark blue wrapper. Without the jewelry and ceremonial headscarf, she looked older, tired. She looked at Niade for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Show me the paper." Niade hesitated. Moronke's voice softened. "Please." Niade handed it over. Moronke unfolded the yellowed page. Her eyes moved across the handwriting. She did not finish reading. Her fingers began to tremble. Adekunle noticed. "Mom?" Moronke folded the paper again. "Where did you get this?" "From Chief Taiwo." Moronke closed her eyes. Adekunle looked from his mother to Niade. "Who is Chief Taiwo?" Neither woman answered immediately. Finally, Moronke said, "Your father knows him." "That's not what I asked." Your father knows him very well. The door opened again. Babatunde stood there. His face had regained its usual composure. Almost. Leave us, he told Adekunle. Adekunle stared at him. No. His father's eyes narrowed. Son, no. Everyone has been telling me to leave rooms tonight. He pointed toward Niade. My wife refuses to enter our house. My mother recognizes a 30-year-old document. You look like you've seen a ghost. His voice cracked slightly. So somebody is going to tell me what is happening. Babatunde looked at Niade. Who else knows about this? Nobody. Who gave it to you? Chief Taiwo. The old man's jaw tightened. That man should have taken the truth to his grave. Niade stood. Maybe he should have. She placed both hands on the table. But your father didn't. Babatunde stared at her. For the first time that night, the powerful patriarch looked old. What did he tell you? Niade answered carefully. He told me my mother was not the woman everyone said she was. Adekunle's face changed. Your mother? Niade nodded. My mother worked in this family's house 31 years ago. Morunke looked away. Niade continued. She left this city carrying a child. Her voice tightened. Me. Adekunle slowly sat down. Babatunde said nothing. Niade looked at him. And before she died, she told me one thing. The old man's eyes lifted. She said your father once promised her that if the truth ever came out, his family would return what belonged to her. Babatunde's hand tightened around his cane. Your mother misunderstood. No. Niade's voice was calm. She didn't. She pulled another folded document from her handbag. This is the land agreement. Babatunde's face went pale. The land beneath this compound, Niade said, was never sold to your family. Adekunle stared at his father. Papa? No answer. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city. Then Babatunde whispered, Who told you to come here? Niade looked at him. You did. And nobody in the room understood what she meant until she placed the final document on the table. It carried Babatunde Adebayo's signature. Dated 29 years earlier, Adekunle stared at the signature. He knew it immediately. His father signed everything the same way. The first letter of his surname sweeping upward before the rest of the name narrowed into a sharp line beneath it. But the date disturbed him more. 29 years earlier, 3 years before Adekunle was born. What is this? He asked. Babatunde did not answer. Niade remained standing. Moronke sat with both hands clasped tightly in her lap. Adekunle looked at his mother. Mum, she swallowed. Your father knows what it is. Then why isn't he saying anything? Babatunde turned toward the window. Because there are things, he said slowly, that become more dangerous when spoken aloud. Adekunle laughed bitterly. That is not an answer. No. His father looked back at him. It is a warning. Niade's voice was quiet. Your father promised my mother this land. Adekunle shook his head. Why? Because she owned part of it. How? Her father owned farmland here, before your grandfather bought the surrounding property. Babatunde interrupted. Your mother's family had no legal claim. Niade looked at him. Then why did you sign the agreement? Silence. Adekunle turned sharply. His father had no response. That frightened him more than any confession could have. For years, Adekunle had believed his father's wealth came from a combination of inheritance, business, and years of hard work. He had never questioned the foundation beneath it. Now he wondered how much of his childhood had been built on something he had never been allowed to see. Who was your mother? He asked Niade. Her name was Adun. Moronke closed her eyes. Adekunle noticed. You know her. Moronke's lips parted. Before she could speak, Babatunde said, Enough. His wife looked at him. No. It was the first time Adekunle had ever heard his mother challenge his father in that tone. Morunke stood. Enough. She walked to the cabinet and removed a small wooden box. She placed it on the table. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a faded red scarf. Niade recognized the scarf immediately. My mother's. Morunke nodded. I kept it because I could not throw it away. Adekunle looked at her. Why did you have it? Morunke's eyes filled with tears. Because I was there when she left. The room became painfully still. Moronke explained that Adun had worked for the family when Babatunde was still a young businessman. She had been trusted by his mother and had helped manage the household during a difficult period. But Adun was not simply an employee. Her father owned the adjoining farmland. When Babatunde's family wanted to expand the compound, a dispute began over the boundary. According to Babatunde, the matter had been settled. According to Adun, it had not. Then one night, Adun disappeared. The family told everyone she had stolen money and fled. Niade listened without interrupting. She didn't steal anything. Moronke lowered her head. I know. Adekunle stared at his mother. You knew? I knew she was innocent. Then why did nobody say anything? Moronke looked toward her husband. Because your father had already lost everything once. Babatunde's expression hardened. I was protecting this family. No, Moronke said. You were protecting the name. Niade reached into her handbag. There is something else. She placed a small cassette recorder on the table. Adekunle frowned. What is that? Chief Taiwo gave it to me. Babatunde took one step backward. Niade pressed the button. Static filled the room. Then an old woman's voice emerged. Weak, breathing heavily, but unmistakably deliberate. If my daughter ever brings this recording to the Adebayo house, it means the promise was broken. Babatunde closed his eyes. The voice continued. I was told my child would be protected. I was told she would receive what belonged to her. A pause. Then, but the child they sent away was not the child they thought they were sending. Adekunle looked at Niade. What does that mean? The recording clicked off. Niade stared at Babatunde. I don't know. Babatunde suddenly walked toward the door. Adekunle blocked him. Where are you going? To speak to Chief Taiwo. You are not leaving. His father's face hardened. You think you understand what you're doing? No. Adekunle's voice lowered. But I understand one thing. He glanced at Niade. You knew something before you married me. Niade's expression broke. I knew there was a secret. Did you marry me to expose it? No. Then why? She looked at him for a long moment. Because I loved you. Adekunle said nothing. Niade's eyes filled. But I could not build a marriage on a lie. Before anyone could respond, a loud knock struck the front door. 3 times. Babatunde froze. Moronke whispered a name. Taiwo. Nobody moved. Then the old man's voice came from outside. Babatunde. A pause. I have come for what you promised. Babatunde's face lost all color. And Niade understood that the agreement was not merely about land. Chief Taiwo entered without waiting for an invitation. He was soaked from the rain. Water ran from the edge of his cap onto his shoulders, and the wooden walking stick in his hand left dark marks across the polished floor. Babatunde stared at him. You should not have come here. Taiwo looked around the room. I have been waiting 30 years to come here. Adekunle stepped forward. What did my father promise? Taiwo's eyes moved to him. Not your father. He looked at Niade. Your grandfather. Niade frowned. My grandfather? Taiwo nodded. Your mother's father. He explained that the land beneath the Adebayo compound had once been part of a larger family farm. When Babatunde's father wanted to expand the property, he negotiated privately with Adun's father, but the old man refused to sell. The reason was simple. The land contained the family well. For generations, neighboring families had depended on it during dry seasons. Selling the land would have made one family wealthy, while cutting several others off from their only reliable water source. Then, the pressure began. Babatunde's father threatened legal action. Adun's father refused. Eventually, Babatunde became involved. He was younger then, ambitious, desperate to establish himself, and convinced that wealth would give his family security. But something happened. Adun's father became ill. Before his death, he made Babatunde sign an agreement. The land could be developed only if the family maintained access to the well and transferred a portion of the property back to Adun's descendants. Babatunde signed. Then, Adun became pregnant. Her father died, and everything changed. Babatunde did not keep the agreement, Taiwo said. He changed the documents. Adekunle looked at his father. Is that true? Babatunde's shoulders lowered. I was afraid. It was the first honest thing he had said all night. He admitted that he had altered the property records after his own father died. He believed that if he lost the land, his family would collapse financially. But Adun discovered what he had done. She confronted him. Then she threatened to expose him. So you called her a thief? Niade asked. Babatunde nodded once. I thought if people believed she had stolen from us, nobody would believe her. Niade's face tightened. And my mother? I did not know she was pregnant. Moronke spoke quietly. You knew. Babatunde looked at his wife. Moronke shook her head. You knew. The truth finally came apart. Babatunde had known. He had discovered the pregnancy after Adun left. He had sent someone to find her, but by then she had disappeared. Years later, Babatunde learned that Adun had given birth to a daughter, Niade. He never contacted them. Instead, he watched from a distance. And when Niade grew older, he discovered that she was educated, intelligent, and determined. Then came the part Adekunle could not accept. His father had arranged the marriage. Not because he hated Niade, because he believed marrying her into the family would prevent the land dispute from ever becoming public. Adekunle stared at him. You used me. Babatunde's eyes filled with shame. I thought I was saving you. You turned my marriage into a transaction. I was wrong. Adekunle looked at Niade. She was crying silently. I knew he wanted the marriage, she said. I didn't know why. Taiwo stepped closer. There is still one thing you do not know. He handed Niade an old envelope. Inside was a photograph. A younger Babatunde stood beside Adun. Between them was a little boy. Adekunle stared at the photograph. Who is that? Taiwo looked at him. Your older brother. The room disappeared into silence. Adekunle's mouth opened. I don't have a brother. You did. Babatunde sat down heavily. He died. Taiwo shook his head. No. He looked at Niade. That is why your mother never trusted this family again. Niade stared at the photograph. The boy had Babatunde's eyes, but the truth was worse than resemblance. On the back of the photograph, in Adun's handwriting, were 6 words. He was taken before I left. Niade looked up. Where is he? Babatunde could not answer. Taiwo did. Alive. Adekunle stepped backward. For 33 years, he had believed he was his father's eldest child. Now he understood why Babatunde had been terrified when Niade arrived. The marriage had not brought one secret back into the house. It had brought the possibility of an entire family history collapsing. Niade folded the photograph carefully. Then she removed her wedding ring. She placed it on the table. I will not enter this house. Adekunle looked at her. For the first time that night, he did not try to stop her. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most. If my brother is alive, his voice broke. Why did my father let me grow up believing he never existed? Nobody answered. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, and somewhere beyond the walls of the Adebayo compound, a man who had been missing for 33 years was already on his way home.